All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is the second of 3 project stewardship workshops, and today we are talking about the Putney General Store. We have Maggie Foley, who's going to facilitate our discussion with our partners here to talk about the store, and then, we'd obviously love to hear from the audience members. This is one of 4 in the project development series, and I'm going to put an image in the chat that has sort of a list of the upcoming series: project stewardship, financial management for projects, project management, and grant writing. So hopefully you'll join us for some more of those. All right, Maggie, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie Foley. I work as a consultant to nonprofits, primarily in Windham County. I do a lot of work around fundraising, board training and development, planning, and facilitating. I'm going to review today's agenda, and then we'll get going. I think we can do introductions, and I'd actually love, since we're a small group, if everyone could introduce themselves, because I think then we can be prepared for thinking about what people are coming into this, what projects they might be thinking about, and we can make sure that it's tailored to our audience here. I'm going to talk a little bit about project stewardship, and then we're going to get into the nitty gritty of the Putney General Store project, which is really a story of resilience and not giving up. And I think kind of illustrates some of those key pieces around stewardship in a really, really important way. I think we'll try to take a break around 9 a.m. We can refill whatever caffeinated or non-caffeinated beverage you have. And then for the second half, we'll open it up to questions and discussion with our speakers today. And we'll start with kind of just general questions and discussion of the Putney General Store project. And then I would encourage towards the end of the day today or morning this morning, people who have specific projects in mind can ask questions about their projects of the people that we have here today. Because I know RT and Lisa are really incredible resources to have here today. So we can open it up for discussion and talk about your projects as well. So why don't does that agenda sound good to everybody? So break around 9 a.m. roughly. Good, we'll wrap up probably at 10. And why don't we start with introductions, and we can keep them brief because each of the speakers will have a chance to talk in more detail, and guests will have the ability to ask questions later. But we can start with introductions, and I'll go in the order of my screen. So we'll start with RT.
Hi, folks. RT Brown with the Bdcc, Director of Business Acceleration and Community Capital Development. It's great to be here. I was involved with the project, which you'll learn about in a little bit.
Thanks, RT. Marty?
I'm Marty Gallagher. I'm here from Greater Rockingham Area Services. We are the 501c3 that manages the buildings and the campus of the old Rockingham Memorial Hospital in Bells Falls.
Cool, thank you. I don't know if Gabriel is on or if he's recording. Are you? There you are. Hi.
Hey, I'm Gabriel. I'm an employee at Bdcc, and I work in part on the USDA Community Facilities Program. So here sort of considering how this relates to that program.
Awesome, thank you. Lisa Papazian.
Hi, I'm Lisa Papazian. I'm here as the project manager of the General Store for the Putney Historical Society. I live in Putney, and I'm also a historic preservation consultant.
Thank you. And Lisa Ryan.
Hi, my name's Lisa Ryan, and I work for the Preservation Trust of Vermont. I've been with the organization now for 6 years as a staff member. I was on their board for 9 years before that. And when the Putney General Store project was happening, I actually worked at the Vermont Community Development Program, which was one of the program funders. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lisa. When I see that we have a few more people join us, and so Eric and Danette and Ethan, why don't you type into the chat your name and the organization that you're representing, and if you have a specific project in mind, which is great if you do. If you don't, that's fine too. Sarah, I feel like you introduced yourself in the beginning, so all right. So when we talk about project stewardship, I'd like to kind of differentiate it in my mind a little bit from project management, because they sound similar, and sometimes I feel like we conflate them. And when I think about project stewardship, I think I'm thinking about the longer term, kind of the vision, the buy-in, the belief in a project more than the project management, which I think really focuses on more immediate goals and objectives, the how and the when of the project, the administering and the directing of a project. Project stewardship to me has a longer arc that really is from kind of the inception of an idea, and almost for some projects feels like it's never ending, that you continue to steward the project over time, whereas a construction project might have that project management piece that is rather defined. Project stewardship really is something about holding a project and caring for resources for an organization over a longer period of time. And so when I think about project stewardship, there's these kind of not softer, but more amorphous themes that are really critical. And that's about, not giving up, building trust with your stakeholders, showing a certain amount of grit and determination in how you are stewarding the project. And I'm really excited that the team from the Putney General Store is here today, because I think that project highlights so many of these pieces that are critical to successful project stewardship. And it really demonstrates that a project can be incredibly challenging and even heartbreaking. And the role of the project steward is this role of keeping it moving forward and not giving up, even when it feels like things are failing. And so I think that the Putney General Store is one of those examples that shows what a winding road project stewardship can be, and how challenging it can be to be the steward of a project like this. And so I really appreciate you guys sharing this story. I feel like, as someone who was in Windham County at the time, but not so involved in the Putney community, I saw the dramatic moments that might have made the cover of the Reformer, but not all the work behind it. And so I'm really excited to learn more about exactly what the story was over time with the Putney General Store. So that's kind of my overarching piece around project stewardship. And I'd love to just dive right in and learn about the example of the Putney General Store. And I think to kick that off, we'll go to Lisa Papazian, who has been involved with this project for a really long time and can share the ups and the downs of this story with us. Then we'll move on to Lisa Ryan, who can talk a little bit about community supported enterprise and the perspective of the funder. I do want to note that Lisa has to leave at 8:45. So when she speaks, if we have specific questions about the Preservation Trust of Vermont's role or anything like that, I'd like her to be able to answer them right in the moment. And then we'll pick back up with hopefully Mike. And if not, we'll go directly to RT and talk a little bit about where the project is today. Does that sound good to everybody? Great. So Lisa, you can go ahead.
All right. Well, thanks, Maggie. Yeah, I think that you're talking about the arc. That's a very good, apt way to describe this project, because, yeah, I was the construction project manager, but the fundraising project manager and the Historical Society has stayed with this project and has played many roles and continues to. We're still we still own the building, so I'm the building manager too. Sarah, do you want to start the slides? I have a set of slides, and I do want to say Mike did ask about the phone number. So if you sent it to him, hopefully he'll join. So Putney, for those who don't know Putney, this is the center of town. This is the center of town about 1900. And the building on the right, S.L. Davis, it says, is our general store. It's been there since 1796. Didn't always look like that, but it has looked like that. It looked like that until 2008. That was when it got its sort of signature look. And it was the center of town. It was the center of town before there was a town down there, actually, because it was at a major crossroads at the falls where there were mills. Go ahead, Sarah. And this is what it looked like about 2006. And you can see that that's the same view, basically, looking up the hill, and down below is coming from the north. That's our town hall. So it really is the center of town. It's an icon. People always say, turn left at the general store, turn right at the general store. When you get to the general store, do this. And you can see it coming, off the highway now. As you come down Main Street, because of a slight angle, it's sort of right at the end of your view, and it's very prominent. And so it really is an icon. It was not called the Putney General Store until about the 1970s, when our most recent long-term proprietor and owner, the Fairchilds, named it that. And the theory is, before that, it was always called, whoever owned it, the SL Davis store, or the Corsair store, or the whoever store. But Fairchilds had another store at the time called the Fairchild store somewhere else, so they called this the Putney General Store, and it is stuck. You can go to the next one. And I should say that up until this fire, which was an accidental fire in May of 2008, it had always been, since 1796, owner occupied. An owner, the store owner always, or almost always, owned the building. That actually may not be true way back in the 19th century. There may be some other examples, but the model is certainly the most common one, I think, in Vermont, maybe in New England, of traditionally the store owner owns the building. So we had this fire in 2008, and we can go to the next slide, because this is when I should say that the Preservation Trust of Vermont, and I also need to say, full disclosure, partly because of this project, I am now the president of the board, or the chair of the board of the Preservation Trust, and I've been on that board since just after this project actually was completed in 2012. So, but it was the Preservation Trust, Paul Brun, the late Paul Brun, who actually suggested that maybe maybe a nonprofit, maybe the community should own the building, and the Historical Society, being the only vaguely relevant nonprofit in town, we were the ones to step up to do this. And there were a number of reasons to do this, and I know that Lisa Ryan will probably talk about how that plays out in a lot of different communities in Vermont. But here we had seen, as I said, there was a long-term owner of the store from the 70s up until about 2000, and then a couple of other quick turnovers. And each time the store turned over, and including the owner at the time of the fire, the debt on the property kept getting higher and higher, and was actually weighing down and the business. And what this owner found was that his insurance coverage wasn't enough to rebuild the building the way it really should have been rebuilt. And to do that, he would have had to go into further debt, which he couldn't do. So Paul's idea was appealing. And in the end, you realize it will have cost so much more to have either restored or rebuilt this building than it is ever actually worth. So the thought was the community owns the building and then controls the fate of the building, which is literally the anchor and the linchpin of the downtown. Having a store there really makes this village what it is. So we went into it with, in November of 2008, negotiating with the owner, who gave us a good deal on a fire sale deal. And with many funding sources, as you can see here, we started to put together the first stabilization and then eventually the rehabilitation. And as Lisa Ryan mentioned, thanks to her, thankfully she was at the other end of the phone when we called VCDP, Vermont Community Development Program, and they were able to help with a significant $200,000 grant. So that gave us a real step up. But the interesting thing about, well, I can answer questions later about, we had many different interesting ways of raising money or raising, creating loans. And I can talk about all those sources if people want. So you can go to the next slide. So having bought it, we went about stabilizing it with that, particularly, that VCDP money in hand, or it promised. We were able to take out a construction loan to start this. We rebuilt the roof, cleaned out the inside, and really stabilized the shell. And this is what it looked like in October of 2009. So it took us a year basically to get it to this point. And I should say that that thermometer there includes hundreds of local donors, $10 donors, $1,000 donors from people I personally know probably have never given that much or even close to that much. And it just came, you know, almost without asking. But we also created a local task force. So we had about, I say, you know, a core group of 10, but up to about 25 people working on this project together. And at that point, we had raised the goal of that project was just short of 900,000, and we had raised quite a bit of it, as you can see at that point. Go ahead to the next slide. But there was an arson fire in the next month after that, and that was pretty intense. And we lost the building completely. Never solved that arson. Never knew who did it or why, and I don't really want to know because it's very dark. But you can go to the next slide. We had good fire insurance, at least that time, because we learned the lesson of the previous owner. But you know, as I said, hundreds of people had donated to that project, and when it burned like that, it was like a kick in the gut to the whole town. And so there was an, you know, spontaneous outpouring of emotion and support. This vigil, I had nothing to do with it. It just happened the next night. And we had even a memorial service in the old church, which, you know, most of the town was in that room, either performing or in the audience. And something that was said at that memorial, the sense of we are the general store, it's not just a building, it's sort of an idea, community idea. Somebody spontaneously wove that into the fence around the hole the next day. So the idea of this, okay, what are we going to do? There was really only a question for a few moments. I mean, the next day when people gathered in the room, it was clear that we had to rebuild. We certainly couldn't let an arsonist define our town. So this Restore the Heart of Putney campaign started off, and we ended up going forward. You can go to the next one. So I would say tragedy turned to hope fairly quickly. You know, I couldn't have scripted the rainbow, but we've had others. Actually, maybe it's a commonplace for a rainbow, but we've had others over that spot. And in the lower left, I mean, aside from the fact that that's Senator Leahy and his wife Marcel, but this sign also was spontaneously created by a local artist, and we put it on the fence. And then it was stolen later. We never figured out that one either. You can go to the next one. But I would say that, you know, the fundraising for this project, which ended up being almost 1.4 million actually, in the upper left, that is Senator Leahy, and we're presenting him with a t-shirt that says, "I help the general store." But what he did bring, and this is also very much helped by the Preservation Trust's connections and support throughout this whole project, was at the time, it was an earmark called the program called the Village Revitalization Initiative. And so that brought, you know, 160,000 in addition to the Vermont Community Development money, which actually ended up adding more than they had originally promised. And that was a big chunk of our fundraising and a huge, you know, a huge start. And another one was having a frame donated by a local timber framer. We, you know, obviously that was the governor at the time, and, you know, granted he's from Putney, but it is important. I guess my point is it's important. We had these fires. That was a sort of, in a way, an unfortunate but easy way to publicize. But, you know, having these events and having the opportunities for public figures to connect to them was key. for us, and I imagine for a lot of other projects. And below, we were having a community barbecue that was, partly donated. I mean, in fact, the new proprietor of the store donated the chickens. The Lions barbecued them, but we were also being given a Pepsi refresh grant at that time. So for a little while, it was the Pepsi General Store. Very little while. You can go to the next one. So again, another year later after that fire, the second fire, this was the frame raising. And it was very much a community event. All of the carpenters in the area helped raise this frame. It was made by Andy Rockefeller of Cross Creek, and it was beautiful. You can go to the next one. And then again, another year, we had these chunks of single years, really, but it was literally a year after that, December in 2011, we finally got to cut the ribbon on this store, and that was the opening day. And as I said, it took almost 1.4 million, including a small amount of debt, which we had hoped to avoid, but we're still working through that. The goal of the debt-free was to keep the rent low. The idea of having a proprietor tenant instead of a proprietor owner, that is our concept today. So the first proprietor was there for 2 years. That was Ming Chow, who was a very experienced grocer, and so he did a serious grocery there, as along with a cafe and Chinese takeout, which he told me he would never do again. And it's just too much work. But the next proprietor was Jim Heel, a local pharmacist who had this dream for years. And so he took it on and actually added a pharmacy to the upstairs. The store had always been a 2-story store, and it's been a challenge figuring out how to best use that space, that retail kind of concept. You can go to the next one. And very sadly, Jim Heel died of cancer in December of 2016. And the family wasn't in a position to sell the business, continue the business. And so the Historical Society, as the building owners, were looking at potentially a shuttered store. And Ming, who was still a friend, and ended up owning a lot of the equipment inside and the contents, which he donated to us. And we said, okay, well, we're going to have to pick this business back up. We can't get someone to run a dead business. We're going to have to make it live again. And we're going to have to do that ourselves before we can attract somebody. We thought we would do it for a few months, then get another proprietor. And well, that wasn't really feasible. And it's a huge thing to take on and open a business like this. So myself and one other board member, Betsy McIsaac, stepped up, thank goodness she did. And as partners, we ran the store for 2.5 years. And finally, it was in a position, we had gotten it pretty stable as a business, and it was doing pretty well. And it was time to go and really find the next experienced proprietor, which I would have to say, go to the next slide. We did in Mike and Kim Costco. We were very fortunate to have them respond to our RFP, or see it. Actually, it was on Craigslist, and that's how they found it. But they have done wonders with the business. I mean, this is a picture taken obviously during COVID, and it was meant to, really show the resilience of this business. And they added a gift store upstairs, the Phoenix Gift Shop, which I think we'll be hearing more about, hopefully. But that's basically the story. I continue to be the property manager, and I work with Mike closely on things that affect both our bottom lines.
Thank
And-
you, Lisa. I can't
Sure.
wait to hear more about the specific funding mix and how that changed from the first fundraising effort to the second in the second half. That was an awesome overview. So thank you. I want to turn to Lisa Ryan right now to talk a little bit about community supported enterprise and also kind of what funders saw in this project that made the fundraising successful. Maybe you can share from the Preservation Trust's perspective how you saw this project and how it was viewed. And then we'll turn over, I think Mike is on the phone now, and we'll get an update after we hear from Lisa Ryan about that. We'll get an update from Mike on where things are now. So Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lisa Papazian, boy, this project is really the epitome of what community supported enterprises are. And you know, that model is one that we have really worked with many communities around the state to consider and to even implement. And so much of the success of other projects has been based on sort of the experiences that the Preservation Trust had working with Lisa Papazian and the team down in Putney, because that was just like a project that was, you know, pivoting on a regular basis, and all because of really things that nobody suspected, right? Like they thought they had this proprietor who was so excited and going to be there forever, and then unexpectedly he passed away. And so, you know, it really helps to illustrate how that nonprofit ownership of the real estate stabilized that very important community gathering place in town. So when we talk about community supported enterprises at Preservation Trust of Vermont, what we're referring to is this kind of hybrid model of a nonprofit private business partnership, right? So you might have a general store, and what we've experienced is that places like general stores, restaurants, cafes, they're very challenging for business owners to manage both the property side of things as well as the business side of things. Like a lot of cafe owners or restaurant owners are great business people when it comes to restaurants, but they may not really be the right person to steward a historic building. And so what we've really worked with communities to do is to identify nonprofit partners who they can work with to hold the real estate. Now, sometimes that's an existing nonprofit. In the case of Putney, it was the Putney Historical Society. In a lot of cases now, what we're doing is working with groups to form what we call community trusts. So an example would be the East Calais Community Trust, or the Elmore Community Trust, or the Rupert Community Trust. And that community trust has the ability as a nonprofit to raise money to purchase and rehabilitate, and oftentimes even help with things like fit up of these properties, whether it's a store or a cafe or a restaurant. And because the nonprofit is able to access these resources that a private business would not necessarily have access to, they can then be flexible and really work with the business owners so that if there's a season, like some of these properties are very seasonally driven, right? There may be like a huge summer community or a huge skiing community. And so in those seasons, business is doing great. And then there's a slow season. So the nonprofit owner of the real estate can really work to adjust things like the rent. They can help write grants if there's equipment that's needed. And the business owner can focus on the business. The business owner can really focus on providing that service that's so important and needed in the community. So we've seen this now. Putney is one of our probably the most successful community supported enterprises I've seen. We worked in Hardwick with a restaurant there called Claire's Restaurant. And when Claire's, that had been a community that had been without a restaurant for a really long time. And they struggled. Every restaurant that opened ended up kind of going under because of financial reasons. So there was an opportunity in Hardwick where there was a building in town that was being rehabilitated that had commercial space on the first floor and apartments on the second floor. So a nonprofit owned the building and was able to fit up the restaurant space. And then a restaurant called Claire's was able to raise money from the community. They did it in the form of $1,000 shares. And this was not like a co-op, but more $1,000 donation. And what that donation got you was a $25 credit once a month when you came in to eat at the restaurant. And if the restaurant stayed open for 4 years, you would have basically eaten back your $1,000. And what that really did was it really motivated people. People wanted to see this succeed. They wanted to be able to bring their friends there, and they were really proud of the fact that they helped support this business. And when they did their projections, I think that they were by the 5th month of opening, they were doing what they thought in terms of income, what they had projected in year 4 in their pro forma. So it was incredibly successful. And they actually were in business for 9 years. And then that business, the partners separated and a new restaurant owner came in. And so there's still a restaurant in that space. So that model, and we definitely, it's not a one size fits all kind of a model. And that's the thing. Like sometimes people think, oh, well, we'll just do that. What we really try to do is go into a community, understand the community, learn who the potential partners are, really help them. A lot of this involves a lot of community outreach and really understanding what does the community need, because sometimes the businesses that fail for a reason, whether it's they're not serving really the highest need in the community, or the person may not have been a great business financial manager. So what we try to do is work with the community to figure out what kind of a model is going to work here, how best to put it together, who best to be part of your team. Because once you go into this nonprofit ownership model, you're working with a board, and there are going to need to be people who continue to be the stewards of that building going forward. So the heavy lift to get these projects back open is really only one part of it. There's also that ongoing stewardship piece. And so, Preservation Trust's role in much of this is not just helping people in the beginning phase, but also kind of being there on the sidelines when things get really challenging, to say like, okay, let's figure out how we can help support you to get to this next level that you need to get to. And whether that's, starting with the rehabilitation, then going to finding a proprietor, then how are we going to do this when that proprietor decides they don't want to do it anymore? So it's an ongoing relationship. Like we're in relationships with lots and lots and lots of communities and lots of projects and lots of people. And we're really excited about the community supported enterprise model, because we have really seen this really help bring these very needed community gathering places back to life in some of our smallest, most isolated communities, whether it's Albany, Vermont, East Calais, Vermont. A lot of times these stores are the place people go. Sometimes they have post offices in them. Sometimes it's the place where you go get your fishing license, and it's a place where you go and see your neighbors when you get your cup of coffee. So that's a bit of a more general overview of community supported enterprise. Funding. I think one of the reasons why these projects are so successful is because you are inviting the community to be part of something that is really much bigger than themselves, right? A lot of times folks will see a building that's underutilized or that has gone out of business, and they'll say, oh, that's really sad. Boy, I really loved shopping at that store. Boy, it's really awful that nobody could figure out how to make that work. And then you invite them in and you say, why don't you be part of this? Help, whether it's as a board member or as a donor. And when they donate to the project, they are then invested in seeing it succeed. So when you have that call out to folks, to to come to an event, they're going to be like, oh, I donated to that project. I'm going to go. I want to see this be a success. And so it's kind of like you're building on the goodwill of the community. You know, I've worked with communities before where they'll say things like, well, you know, we're not like those other towns. We don't have people in our community with money. We don't have people who would do that. They'll say things like, well, there's 4 other fundraising projects going on right now, so no one's going to donate to our project. And what we've really seen is that through that community outreach and through inviting the community in and really helping them to see that they are part of what's going to make this a success, that, as Lisa said, there were people who donated to Putney General Store who, you know, people never would have thought would have been so generous and given. And we've seen the exact same thing, you know, and the communities themselves, the folks who are working on these projects, have been shocked by the the level of generosity. I mean, I got an email 2 days ago from one of our projects that the email literally said, "You're never going to believe this. We just got a $100,000 anonymous donation." And I said, actually, I believe it. Like, you've done amazing work. You have really put yourselves out there and you've invited people to be part of this. So it's exciting. It's really exciting. And, you know, as far as state funding and federal funding goes, you know, we recently, Lisa talked about the Village Revitalization Program through Senator Leahy's office, and that being a big donor to Putney General Store. Senator Leahy worked really hard to have a grant. It was called the Historic Village Revitalization Grant Program through the National Park Service. And after Paul's passing, it was renamed the Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Grant Program. And we've been the recipient of those grants for 2 years in a row. And what we do is we are able to subgrant funding to projects that are building economic vitality in small villages and downtowns, so communities of 7,500 or less. And, you know, some of them are community supported enterprises, some of them are nonprofit organizations, whether it's a theater or an arts organization or a town hall. We can also fund some municipal projects. But really, the Park Service saw the value in these nonprofit for-profit partnerships. You know, Senator Leahy has certainly been a champion. The Vermont Community Development Program, my understanding is that they have really shifted a lot of their focus to some smaller projects and projects that that include things like housing and retail together in one building. So it's been really exciting.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That is really, really helpful to hear. Does anyone have any questions for Lisa? Marty, go ahead.
So the business that I am the administrator for, Greater Rockingham Area Services, kind of, I think is what you're talking about. When Rockingham Memorial Hospital went under, a new entity, a nonprofit, was formed called Greater Rockingham Area Services. And they, it was under the direction of Rose Fowler at the time. And she did a lot of community connections, community involvement, and she was able to get the building renovated and re-up and running as a health center. But Greater Rockingham Area Services was no longer the entity that provided the health. They rented space to health providers. So we rent to Springfield Medical Care System, Springfield Hospital, HCRS. We have a dental center. So we, as Greater Rockingham Area Services, don't provide the healthcare. We maintain the building. We do keep our rents low so that the healthcare providers can operate, which then means that we have not a huge amount of income coming in. We have an older building. The building's been neglected, and I'm looking at a significant amount of money that has to go into upgrading heating systems, air handling systems, all of our kind of basic infrastructure. And that money can't come from our rental. We're almost fully rented. I can't come up with another revenue stream to create more money. So I'm looking to figure out how to fund these projects. So I don't know if I fall under your purview, because we we are made up of a board, and then we have incorporators, and the incorporators are all part of the community. So we have some community support. So I guess I would just, there's a long road to the question, would I fall under your purview?
I just put my name, email, and phone number in the chat, and I would be happy to chat with you.
Okay.
You know, our organization works with different groups all over the state. So let's just talk. I mean, I'm not familiar with your building, but you know, we can connect more specifically about your project and see if that's something we can, if we can't help with funding through our grant programs, we can certainly help kind of steer you in the right direction.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So
Lisa, thank
unfortunately,
you
I
so
have
much
to,
for joining us today.
yeah, I have to jump off. I have another meeting here at 9, but my contact information is in the chat. Feel free to give me a call if other folks have questions.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thanks, Lisa. So now I think what would be awesome is to hear where the Putney General Store is today. And I believe that Mike is on the phone, and he is the current proprietor with his wife. And Mike, if you're able to unmute by hitting *6, we'd love to hear how things are going at the Putney General Store. *6 to unmute if you're there. All right, I'm going to let RT talk a little bit about how they've been able to support Mike. And if Mike is able to unmute, he can jump in at some point. And if he's not, we might have to get an update from Lisa about the current store and a little bit more about how Mike and Kim are operating. So RT, why don't you tell us a little bit about Bdcc's involvement and how you were able to support Mike and help him get up and running as the new proprietor of the Putney General Store?
Sure, thank you. Let me step back for a minute. Oh, Mike, you there?
Yeah, so I think so. I think I'm in now.
Okay, all right. I'm going to shut up.
All right then.
Go ahead, Mike. Thanks. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, sorry about the technical difficulties.
So it'd be great if you just told us a little bit about where the store is now and how you decided to take this leap and get involved, and we'd love to hear the update.
Yeah, the leap part kind of was a natural growth. We, my wife and I, kind of revitalized a building that was built to be a general store north of Boston in a nice rural town in a western part of a small town that needed a general store over its 100 years, but the building hadn't been used that way for a while. So we kind of started from scratch at the old business. So over 8 years, we created, you know, the center of town that the Putney General Store is on. It was a much smaller scale, but, you know, a meeting place, a very happy, positive, useful building like a general store should be. Kind of an updated version because there's, you know, a lot of Home Depots and Bed Bath and Beyonds and things out there that general stores used to serve that purpose. But, you know, general stores are slightly different now, depending where they are. So that business had grown to a point, and my kids had grown to a point where we could consider the opportunity that my wife just stumbled on Craigslist. You know, we were looking for some furniture because the business was doing well, and we were going to, you know, kind of shift things around in the building and make, you know, get to some projects we had been thinking of for a long time. And we ran across that Craigslist ad and decided, well, we have to go see it. I mean, it's kind of what we had been envisioning for ourselves someday in the future. So we went out, and it took almost no time to decide, well, yeah, this is kind of where we belong. So it took a long time for us to undo our lives and sell the business, sell our house, and move out there. And, you know, of course, it's very complicated to take over a new business and learn all the systems and all the people and the employees and the vendors and the customers. So we struggled through all of that. I mean, it's a good job. We know what we were getting into, and we enjoyed this work. But it wasn't long before COVID kind of crashed down on us. And, you know, that was a couple of months of kind of fear and uncertainty and anxiety because, you know, it got worse and worse. America had seen these type of things in other parts of the world, but it had never really come to our doorstep like this seemed to be coming. And then, mid-March, the economy kind of shut down. But as a general store should be, it's considered essential. So we've stayed open every day that, this whole time. It's open 7 days a week, and we never did shut down. And we let a couple of, we needed to, as customers were told to stay home and not go into, closed environments. Business definitely took a hit for several months. And we had a couple of employees who were older or had some health concerns. So it was kind of, serendipitous, I guess, to let those people go home for their health reasons, which reduced our payroll to a point, just made sense. You can't have too many people standing around without the customers. And we did participate in the payroll protection program. So that kind of kept us afloat. That worked for us exactly the way I think the government intended. That kept us going during the darkest days of all that. And business started to pick up in the summertime when the weather was nice and the windows were open. People got more comfortable wearing masks. And, we've chugged along since then. So we've definitely survived it. And now we're to the point where it's only weeks away where this vaccine should get us back to normal life. So we're really optimistic about, what Putney can be, the vision that we've all had, that the community has. So we're getting into, a bright future. And if I could just say something about everything that was said before me on this call, we're extremely, appreciative and grateful for all this project, the fundraising and the community involvement that creates this store as it is. And when you use that phrase, community supported enterprise, that's basically what the business is, even aside from that. We work with the community to be what they need. They come and, buy a coffee and groceries, and everybody, spends and contributes to the revenue of the business. And for our part, we try to become what the community needs. And we make a very positive place for our employees to be. And that positive feeling, creates a positive environment for the customers to come and enjoy, and the product and, all the details that go into running that store. But it's really a partnership between all of those players. And it's a ton of work, obviously, but, and, I should say my wife and I, we're a tag team for these businesses. And I don't know how people do it by themselves. We definitely need the two of us to manage it all. And Lisa's been great, helping with the history and the business side and the building side. So we have a good partnership going here between all these players.
Nice. Mike, will you tell us, I think Lisa had mentioned that the second floor has always been a bit of a conundrum of how best to use that space. Can you tell us how you're using both the first and the second floor of the building?
Yeah, it's part of what drew us there, that in the old business, my wife, in her years, her history, had started several small businesses and always wanted a gift store. At one point, she was running the busiest Hallmark store north of Boston. That was 20 years ago. So she's always been kind of a gift store minded person. And she squeezed a gift store into our little general store that was only, I think it was 900 square feet. And when we got here, it was like, this was the space to put the gift store she always had in mind. And naming it seemed obvious, that the building had literally risen from the ashes twice. She also had been in a kind of a management group, discussing how to grow personally and how to grow your business. And that was, among them, they called themselves the Phoenix Group. So there was a couple indicators of what this business should be called and kind of the vibe it should put off. So, it's been hard. That business was not considered essential. So that suffered a lot. So we focused on the downstairs during the COVID times. But the people who've come up there really appreciate kind of the atmosphere and the offerings. You know, it's not a Hallmark store. It's a place for, you know, gifts for yourself and gifts for your you know, friends and family. It's very warm, with, you know, handmade soaps and aromatherapy and clothing. There's a huge assortment of stuff up there. So it's really something we're trying to get the word out, because it's not something that's that you see around. It's kind of unique.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. I don't know if you're able to stick on the phone. I was going to let RT talk a little bit about BDCC, and then after the hour do a few questions. But I think that you might be traveling, and I'm wondering if you'd prefer to see if anyone has any questions right now.
Well, if we could take the questions now. I did. I pulled over. I'm on the road, and I'm sorry. I messed up my scheduling doing this.
Okay.
But yeah, if anybody's got any questions now, that'd be great.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions for Mike for him to answer specifically? I think Lisa has a good sense of the business as well, and RT has worked with the business, so we can continue to discuss it this morning, and they can chip in. But if you have a specific question for Mike, now is a great time. I think, Mike, we are great. I love hearing about the store. I want to come visit and check out the upstairs, because I've never actually been in the upstairs. So that will be next on my list. And thank you for making time, and thanks for pulling over to jump on this. And yeah, we appreciate it.
Thanks,
No,
Mike.
I'm happy to do it. Like, yeah, all your organizations really made it possible for us to be there. So I'm happy to help.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
So RT, if you could tell us a little bit about BDCC's involvement with this project, how you've worked with Mike, and how you help kind of new businesses figure out how to get off the ground and offer them support. That would be really awesome.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, let me step back just a little bit. You know, as most of you folks know, the BDCC is the economic development entity in the region. Primarily, our focus is to help build a more vibrant economy, and a lot of times that's through the helping businesses so that they can create jobs and so forth. So my area of focus at the BDCC is on small business resources in the region, and you know, that's a really broad category, if you will, because that could be, you know, helping somebody who literally walks through the door and says, I have an idea for a new business, but I don't know where to start. So, you know, it's helping folks like that. But it's also helping folks who, you know, are, you know, they've already established their business, and they have space and they have production, but, you know, they've got issues that they need help with. Mike came to us in our planning call. I had to be reminded of this. I think it was a referral from the town manager at the time. So, you know, I think we got an email, and one thing led to another, and we ended up meeting, learning about the project. And you know, I've been in the area about 5.5 years. So I didn't know the full depth and breadth of the story of the Putney General Store. So when I did start to learn about it through working with Mike and Lisa, I gained a great appreciation for it. So of course we were more than happy to help. But you know, so what Mike and Kim needed were basically some funding for working capital. So we have a USDA funded micro entrepreneur loan program, and that's to help businesses with 10 or fewer employees, businesses that would have a difficult time obtaining traditional financing, and that can be for, you know, a boatload of reasons. In this case, it's a new business essentially. So yeah, there were some historicals from the previous business, but you know, Phoenix Gifts is new. So oftentimes traditional lenders have a hard time because of the risk nature of that. So that's where we step in. And along with the loan proceeds, are this particular program, and I think it's been helpful to Mike and Lisa, maybe can add to this. It comes with what we call a technical assistance grant, and there's so few times outside the world of COVID, there are so few times that I can say that there's a grant for a business. We get asked that all the time, but it's really, there really aren't, unless you're in agriculture or value-added food production. There's just not many grant opportunities, which is why you see things like business plan competitions and pitch competitions, because those are the way new businesses can get some seed funding. So this technical assistance grant that accompanies the loan can be applied to the project, if you will, to either help the new business owners get some professional development or get some tools that they need to put themselves professionally on a more solid footing to run their business, so that it can. And the idea is that the business is just on a better foundation to be successful. So it can go to professional development. It can go to maybe an initial marketing campaign. So we work with the business to help define what that project is. Mike used those funds for like an energy assessment, because believe it or not, the general store consumes a lot of energy due to the refrigeration that's involved, due to the cooking equipment and so forth. So I don't know, and I'm regretful that I didn't ask him this before he got off the phone, but so they did like this energy audit assessment. I don't know if it has led to, as of today, any action to be better used and more efficient. But essentially, we feel like our role is to help the business like this. We try to make it easy for them and provide them with the resources. I mean, they needed working capital, so we have a tool in place to help businesses access the capital that's needed. They needed some support through the technical assistance grant, so we were able to provide that. At the time, Mike had part of a business plan, but of course you need a little more than that when you're applying for funding. So we have a tool that's provided to folks, and it's grant funded as well. So there's no cost to the business to help build out their business plan. And I work with people every day to help create their business plan and their financial projections. The bottom line is we hopefully are a complement to the community focused enterprises by supporting the entrepreneur on the business side and providing them with the tools and the resources they need to be as successful as they can be. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to.
Thank you, Archie. It's awesome to think about it that way, that I feel like, Lisa, I feel like you have a lot of experience with the funding for the nonprofit, kind of the community supported side, and then Archie complementing that with how you can support the entrepreneur side. And I think there's a lot of expertise here to tap into around that. And so I'm going to suggest that we take a quick break, and I'm seeing our participants, and I'm loving that we have all these different towns of Dover and Wilmington and Putney and Rockingham. So I think after the break, we'd love to, Archie and Lisa are available to answer questions. We can have some discussion. We can talk about what are common around these communities and the projects, what are the common threads and what are the differences. And so Marty and Eric and Danette and Ethan, if you want to throw any questions in the chat so you remember them, that's great. Or you can work on remembering them and coming back after the break and we can start our discussion. I'm also really curious if you've heard any lessons learned about project stewardship already that could apply to your project, and you can note them them in the chat too. I'm curious how this is applying to what you're working on. So it's 9:04. Let's come back at 9:14. I'll start yelling into my computer right around then to let you guys know to come on back. But we'll see you at 9:14 and we'll have questions and discussion before we wrap up. So thank you. All right, we will get ready to get started. Marty, I like your comment around the definition of stewardship. I do feel like that grit and determination, I see it especially with volunteer driven stewardship projects. I feel like there's that. I think, Lisa, you mentioned it at some point, like that feeling of there's no choice to give up, almost just like, you know, it's non-negotiable. You have to keep going and keep moving forward with things. So I'm going to get to questions. I would love to kick off, if it's okay, just hearing, Lisa, a little bit more details about your funding mix. I know you mentioned that you had some creative funding and loans, and I'd love to hear what those were and how things shifted from your first fundraising effort to your second. I'm unclear how that worked, if you had to if the money was considered a loss or if the insurance helped, and if you had to like reapply and just how you raised, what would the total be, like 2.2 million by the time all was said and done, or however that worked. I'm interested to hear more.
Sure. I warn you, I'm unmuted, but so are my dogs now. So they were just off. It was, no, the end total was 1.38 million, which I just, as I think I said, we're taxed on an appraised value of like 450,000. And this is the crux of the problem throughout Vermont, downtown, like the Putnam block, the Brooks House. These projects cost so much more than they can generate in rent or are valued in the real estate market. And hence, this is why we attract these donations, so that the community has ownership of something they don't want to lose, but the market would easily have, it go to something much more efficient. And I would say that we were skeptical of that model initially. Quite. some of my team were just like, what? Why would we keep owning the building? But now I look around, and when we started in 2008, there were, half a dozen businesses in downtown, and increasingly, historically, commercial properties are just flipping to residential because they cannot rent them commercially. And I'm so glad we are holding, if we didn't hold this corner and make sure it stays a store, and obviously from my, perspective, a successful store, we would be a bedroom community in a few moments, I think. So I'm glad we did that. In terms of the funding, in the end, we had raised what had we raised? Like close to 500,000 for the pre-fire, and then pre-second fire, and then we were well insured. So we really got what we had put into it, except for we lost in the end about $44,000 all, from phase one to phase two. And in phase one, we had a historic building. So we had, I was planning on doing a federal historic tax credit, the state historic tax credit. We went to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which funds, historic buildings and resources and community projects. And in the end, and VCDP, which that was really more of a, it was actually a blight, or what is it called? Urgent need. It was urgent need. It wasn't blight. It was urgent need. So after much convincing, I would say the Preservation Trust helped. VHCB, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which helped us buy the building initially and held an easement on it. Well, their easement was on a historic structure that didn't exist, but they were willing to keep their funding in, thank goodness. VCDP also was willing to transfer the grant to the next project and increased it. But we lost the tax credit. We lost the both tax credits because we didn't have a historic building anymore, or even an old building. And I would say that we ended up with, again, that village revitalization grant, federal grant. That was a huge piece of our funding. Totally, our grants ended up totaling just over $500,000. So, you know, half, I would say. And we ended up with $230,000 worth of mortgage to cover the last piece, just to get the store open. And, you know, we are still trying to pay that down. We ended up with local businesses, you know, Subaru, the bank at the time, Pepsi, which is owned by the local Pepsi. Those were small but significant grants. We went to everyone we could think of. We went to the Thompson Trust, which is a local to Windham County grantor, who initially said no, because if you remember in 2008, it was a recession, a very serious recession, and they had refocused all their grant making to urgent community needs and human needs. But by the second time we asked them, after we showed them, you know, 200 plus local donors, and that it didn't matter the number that we had raised from them. It was the number of supporters that changed their mind. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is. I mean, success breeds success, but just showing the local support through minor donors, donations of in-kind. We had a lot of donations of in-kind services and stuff, trees. People donated trees off their land for the timber frame, and people donated, you know, saw to saw it up, a sawmill. Another interesting thing right in the beginning, also, I said, the fall of 2008 was not a time when, you know, it was hard to raise money because things were really, that was, you know, the crash really. But we were able to get a loan at the bank. Now, you can't do this anymore because of financial issues that have happened in the intervening time. But at the time, the local bank was able nimbly, because they knew their own customers well enough, without like you know, all the details and financials submitted, they were willing to take guarantees, loan guarantees, and, you know, almost like a savings secured loan. They were willing to, you know, so local people were able to pledge to guarantee 10,000, 5,000 of our loan, which was, I think we raised 100,000 that way, without having to liquidate stocks or cough up the money. And they just took a chance on us. So that was actually a huge tool at the right moment. But I think it's a tool that could work. Unfortunately, now I don't think a bank would so easily just say, okay, I know Joe Schmo, he's been banking here for 20 years. I don't need his financials. They would, you know, that, which is intrusive. So that's a little bit of a challenge for that. But we have about 12 different grant sources, foundations, some small, some big. And as I said, in the end, it was more than 440 local donors. Many of those were repeat donors. A lot of people gave again. So I hope that I can add.
That's really helpful. I love that, you know, the success breeds success. It's like, when does your project get to that tipping point that it has the confidence of the community, and then it feels like a shift happens, you know, when you can get there and when people can see kind of that growing confidence. RT, you had your hand raised, and I'd love to go over to you. And I also want to encourage anyone else after to raise your hand or start typing questions or comments into the chat. Happy to use both the chat function and the hand raise function for a discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know, add or augment to something Lisa said a little bit ago around the conundrum of it's the value of the end product relative to a building is it costs more than the market will bear, essentially. And that's a, regardless of the project, even for private enterprise projects, that is the issue in the Northeast and a lot of rural regions. That's why BDCC, for example, has been involved with expansion projects like with GS Precision, as well as Chroma, and bringing in what are called those new market tax credits for larger projects. I don't mean to go down that rabbit hole specifically, but I think I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that the cost to build and construct is, despite whether it's for private enterprise or community related projects, housing, whatever, is always higher than what the market will value, which is just, it's a problem. So that's all.
I just wanted to add one thing, which is RT was talking before about how few resources there are for profit private owners of businesses. There is one other, which is the downtown state tax credit, which is available in designated village centers, of which there are increasing numbers in small towns, as well as downtowns in the bigger towns. I know Wilmington is one. Anyway, Putney is one. And it's actually, unlike the federal historic tax credit, it's easy to monetize. I've done it with another project. Whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, you can sell these credits relatively easily for like 90 cents on the dollar, 85 cents on the dollar. And it's a great source of funding, even if you're not doing, it's primarily for code improvements, elevators, sprinkler systems, hazardous, remediation. It can be used for a lot of things, facade improvements, sorry, dogs. Anyway, that's a great source for private people,
I have another question.
Yep.
And I'm probably going to embarrass myself. Lisa, when you say it's easy to sell those credits, who are you selling them to?
Well,
I just have never been involved in that kind of project.
Again, this is Paul Bruin's genius that he made the legislation work this way when he was part of creating it. I can't remember what they're called, but it is the credits you get are essentially these things that banks and insurance companies pay in lieu of taxes. I can't remember what they're called.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Banks and insurance companies have a tax liability that can be these credits can be used for, and so they're happy to, get $100,000 credit for paying 90,000.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And the paperwork involved legally and just administratively is so easy, so that's why say it's easily done.
Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you.
That's not embarrassing, RT. I feel like it reminds me a little bit about opportunity zone funding. I feel like one of my clients, I always joke that it's like, here's the opportunity zone, here's the money, and in the middle is a black box that you're not allowed to find out what's in it, right? Like that it's just like, everyone's like, oh, are you in an opportunity zone? I'm like, and what happens then?
Right.
So, I feel like there's a little bit about some of the tax credit mechanisms that remind me of that. I'm a fundraiser, and so I'm curious, with this kind of community supported enterprise model, Lisa, what Putney's approach has been, if they've continued to fundraise annually, and how they, I think expectation is too strong a word, but what the aspiration is for continued community involvement financially. And I asked this as a member of the Friends of Algiers fundraising committee, which admittedly is a little bit different because the organization's mission is broader than the Guilford Country Store. But there's a lot of similarities too in the two models. And so I'm curious if you still fundraise, how you think about that mortgage and fundraising efforts, and where you are with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, just an aside, Lisa said now they're encouraging village trusts to form as a nonprofit to be the ones that hold the property. I would say that would be a very good model. It's really hard as a historical society, which has a different mission, to keep my board, you know, really someday I'd like to create that entity and transition the building to it, because that should be the focus. So we raised $1.3 million in this town, which is a huge amount of money. And we kind of felt like we sucked the fundraising ability out of the town, and all the other entities in town had to kind of wait. So we, you know, basically said, okay, we have to put it to bed for a while. That's why we went for the mortgage in the end. We just said, we have to stop, open the store, and let other people do their projects and do their fundraising. And in fact, the Historical Society took on, in the middle of this, took on the church, which, you know, the former church, which folded in the middle of the general store project. We took that church on, and eventually did a, you know, 5-6 years later, did a project with a new entity that turned it into a performing arts center. So that was the big fundraising suck in the town. And then others, you know, so we wanted to basically step back and not be, you know, greedy in a sense. I know Lisa Ryan said there's capacity. There may be capacity depending, and obviously some donors are specific to some projects, but we have stayed back, and now we are looking at stepping up a new campaign to retire that mortgage. We've got it down to 150, but we want to retire it as soon as possible, which would hopefully give us more of a security piece for the building, and hopefully help us keep that rent low, or even lower from where it is now.
That's really interesting. I know a lot of organizations that kind of get in that circle of, or I, you know, and I'm a part of it, you know, how compelling is the retire the mortgage fundraising initiative, and do you need to have it part of a more comprehensive campaign? Can you do it as a standalone? And I think Guilford grapples with that same question, even though they're probably more active on an annual level for fundraising. Marty, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
So when you were doing this project, were you basically the only one doing it, or did you have help navigating all this?
I had help, but I won't lie to you that it was a huge amount of time. And I was fortunate to be able to give it to the project. I mean, because I felt so strongly about it, but there were a lot of people who also did, and I had definite strong fundraising partners who stayed with me and who still advise us, which is great. As I think at one point we had a core group, task force group of about 10 people who stayed together for the most part throughout the whole project, which took years. But you know, we had at least 25 people coming to regular meetings when we were actively fundraising and planning. So, and they, you know, hopefully each of them went out and advertised, or, you know, brought other people in.
Lisa, was there ever a time, like, I feel like this is kind of the never give up story, right? But it seemed like there were so many challenging times. Was there ever a time where getting discouraged outweighed that kind of sheer force of will, and that you started to question whether it would come together? Or, you know, it seems like there's maybe a day after the second fire, but you know, how much do you feel like you just kind of were able to keep your eye on the future, versus how much did it start to get a little bit discouraging? I think probably that's a little bit of a light.
Well, at a certain point you get down the road and failure is not an option. You've just invested so much of your own time and social capital in the town. You just have to make it work. And I feel like a lot is at stake in our case. You know, if this fails, it could easily become nothing, a house, or, you know, I don't know what, but having that general store there, anchoring the town is really important. And so there are times when I would like to hand it over to someone else and say, you do it for a while. And thank goodness Betsy McIsaac came on and said, I would never have been able. I mean, Mike said, he and Kim are a great team and it would be hard to do it alone. And they are experienced. I mean, we were not experienced and I never could have done it alone. And, so it is important. And I'm not very good at delegation or even talking people into it. I mean, Lisa's much better at that, Lisa Ryan, but I think it is important to bring as many others, and they're out there, people who feel strongly about stuff, and make them part of feeling part of the project. Yeah, I don't know. When we, yeah, there were a number of, I mean, there's so many hiccups. I can't, the project went way over budget. The tenant fit up, was, and it was twice what we thought it would be. And then we had a building that was, we hired an architect because of their energy efficiency chops, really, and they made the most energy efficient building, which then we had to get all the refrigeration heat out of, which because it was trapped there, and we're still struggling with that. Our team mentioned an energy audit, and we finally that helped identify some major issues, and we were able to start chipping away at that. But there's all kinds of, you never know.
Absolutely. Eric and Ethan and Marty, or Artie and Sarah, and if anyone has any more questions specifically about the Putney General Store, we can keep asking them. But in the meantime, I also want to hear from Marty. I think you have a specific project in mind, and do you have any kind of questions or ways that might align with this project or with the idea of project stewardship in general that you want to bring to this group? Not to put you on the spot, you can pass if you want to.
No, that's fine. I think the thing that, again, the reason I put it in the chat was the thing that struck me is kind of the grit and determination that you pointed out, and then you didn't have a choice point that Larissa pointed out. I don't have a choice. I've been hired. It is my job, number one, so that kind of makes it different. But the health center building, the structure of the health center has been neglected for too long. The can's been kicked down the road, and we're one major disaster away from not being open, basically. And so I don't have a choice. So that's, it was good to kind of hear from somebody else that was in that position to not have a choice and made it work. And I think it's, right now I'm kind of in that gathering information, making connection stage. I have an idea of what we need to have done. It's going to be probably millions of dollars worth of work over a period of time, but it has to be done. We like the Putney General Store, the health center is an anchor in Bellas Falls. It's it's a community resource. Granted, people don't come there and gather for coffee, but it all the services that we offer, because we're not just physical health, we're mental health. We're our newest tenant works with PTSD first responders. So we have this community of health options available very conveniently within the township. It's, people can walk to it, they can take the bus to it. We get people from across the river, people from all the outlying towns. So we are an anchor, and it's a big economic aspect in the town of Bellas Falls to draw new people to Bellas Falls, because people often look to know where is their health care if they're moving to a new town. Well, if it's conveniently located. So I don't have an option. So I think that was a very helpful to think, okay, there's been other people that haven't had options and they figured it out. So
I'm not
giving me
familiar with
some
the
hope.
building. Can you tell us a little bit about the building itself and what condition it's in? Is it historic, and what it needs?
I don't know if it's technically historic. It was built in 1953. It was the Rockingham Memorial Hospital. So it was built as a hospital. It's basically a brick building, concrete slab construction. There's 2 floors. The main floor is visible on the parking lot level, and the lower floor is visible on the lower street level. Again, it was started out as Rockingham Memorial Hospital. They went defunct, I think it was in the 80s. And since then, it's been, we've rented to Springfield Hospital and Springfield Medical Care Systems. It's always been, I don't know the historical significance. I know most people in town can date back to having been born there, which, I guess that's anecdotal history. And we actually own, it's a whole campus. We own 2 other buildings as well. We own what we call the Pro Building, and then we own a house that is operating as a daycare center. But the main building, the hospital building, it's got probably its original boiler system. So the boilers are like many, many years beyond life expectancy. The air handler system, many years beyond life expectancy. Structurally, it's got good bones. It just needs some TLC. It's been neglected for so long because you get in that conundrum of your income coming in just doesn't allow for you to have a lot in the form of, capital expenditures set aside. And previous boards, to my knowledge, there's never been fundraising or capital campaigns. So that's also on my agenda to try to bring into my tenure as the administrator, is to get an active, board sector of fundraising going as well. Again, to get that community buy-in. I think a lot of people just take for granted that the health center is going to be around forever. No big deal. It'll just be there.
That's so interesting to see this model though with healthcare. I think I had been kind of in the general store, and then you see restaurants and you see some level of retail, but it's interesting to think about it with healthcare. And it does, I think of other large entities, both kind of campus entities and aging campus and aging healthcare entities in Vermont, and how they have these big rambling buildings and campuses, and it's not at the core of their mission, but it might be inhibiting them fulfilling their mission. I think about, even like the Brattleboro retreat right now, having this huge campus with huge capital needs, and the management of that property, and how that is a huge responsibility for organizations that have limited revenue margins as nonprofit healthcare providers. And so I think that's a really interesting to think about where else there might be kind of that healthcare community that you can use as a resource. And if there's other models that are similar to yours, because that's really interesting. Lisa, RT, do you have any thoughts?
I was just going to say, well, because I've never operated in the healthcare field, that I'm not familiar with grants that are specific to that area, but I know they're out there. And so I would encourage you, Lisa Ryan, I encourage you to talk to Lisa. She's definitely a huge resource, but I encourage you to talk to the Vermont Community Foundation, because they aggregate funders, and they have many, many different interests, and they can sort of maybe suggest a match or some ways to approach. I'm a historic preservation consultant, and I'm actually working with the Southern Vermont Medical Center right now on very similar issues. But 1953 is probably mid-century modern. It probably could be considered historic. I've just listed a number of mid-century modern properties on the National Register. Whether that would help or not, with multi-million-dollar project, it might be in your interest to try to imagine it as a historic preservation federal grant. But again, I'm not sure how many changes you need. If it's mostly fixing the building and upgrading the systems, it might be a good match. But it's complicated. So to monetize the federal credit, especially for a nonprofit, there are people that can advise you who have done it. But it is complicated. But for a multi-million-dollar project, it very well might be worth it.
I also wonder about the USDA Rural Development Grant and Loan Program. And I know Gabriel was on and had mentioned that. And I don't know if he is specifically a resource or if...
Oh, we're like this right now.
Okay, good.
We're good buddies.
Because that does seem like a really appropriate grant loan combo to for that project. RT, you looked like you were about to say something.
No, I was just, I in the break, I popped over to Gabriel's office, and I said to him, I had and I feel I'm in a place of feeling silly today. That I hadn't thought of the community foundation relative to the Rockingham project, Marty. So, you know, I'm just so grateful that you were here in this session today, because I think that, you know, and for all the reasons Lisa just articulated, a mid-century modern building, I mean, that might be a really appropriate direction to pursue, because these projects don't get done, you know, with one resource. So,
Right.
you know, your project is so big, I think you'll be able to utilize both USDA community facilities as well as, you know, some of these other resources. So that's an awesome outcome for today's session.
Yeah, no, it was a good connection. No, I realized that the USDA, if we again, it becomes exactly what you said, that projects cost so much more than you can get from renter from property. I can't get into so much debt in a loan, like a USDA loan, that I can't make my payments, you know, so I have to look at grant funding.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to type in the chat right now Elizabeth Marks's email address. She is the Windham County philanthropic advisor for Vermont Community Foundation. What she does, and I think she'd also be able to point you to other VCF programs, but what she does is she learns about a project and then she holds the portfolio of who the donors to VCF are in the community. And she is really great at connecting interested donor advised funds with different projects. So she kind of ends up having a sense of what the community's projects are and who the donors are that might be interested.
Okay.
And
Great.
And I'd be happy to introduce you via email, Marty, if that's helpful, because
That would be very helpful. Yeah, thank you.
For very small amounts of money, you might try the Thompson Trust, because they are, as I said, they're regional and they are primarily focused on healthcare. That's how they were founded, to support the Brattleboro Hospital. So, or sort of, but you know, that's definitely a place I would look. They're not going to come up with a lot of money. But that's a source.
Foundations are doing so well right now too. It is a fun time to be looking out to them. I think the Holt Fund is Rockingham in their service area too. They're another healthcare focused foundation.
We are
Grafton too. I'm not.
We are, but I don't know if, because we don't specifically provide the health care, I don't know if we as much qualify. And I've heard, and I'm not sure about this, that they're getting away from the health care funding. I know they fund a lot of Springfield Hospital's projects. And when I was managing a fitness center within the hospital building, we got a Holt grant for fitness programs that we were running. But I don't know if they look towards infrastructure type grants.
Right, if they'll do capital projects.
Yeah.
Definitely the VCF can, even if it's not their own funding, can help connect you with other funders. Any other questions or areas of discussion we want to bring up before we wrap?
Marty, did you attend in November? I put on a funders roundtable. Did you attend that?
I did attend that, and I've watched it a couple times, and I've gotten I've kind of identified who I'm reaching out to, and it's just a matter of sitting down and doing like a full day of email.
Yep.
You know, and that's the thing that's why I asked the question to Larissa, was she the only one doing it? I'm the only one doing it. I still have to do my day-to-day work. So
Right. It's
finding the balance. And right now I'm working with Gabriel doing for a grant, working on I got deadlines to get. So I'm kind of pacing myself as to, but yeah, I watched it a couple times because I went to the initial one, then I watched it again now that I have more of a scope of what we need. So yeah, that was very helpful, as was your grant writing workshop that you did as well too.
Good. Well, if you want like email introductions to anyone on
Okay.
that, just let me know.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think with that, I think we're ready to wrap up. We can all build in, as I said, a little bit of travel time to our 10 o'clock meetings, a little breather before we have to move on with the day. But thank you so much, Lisa and RT, for your reflecting your experiences today. I thought it was really fun, awesome project to hear about, and really great to get your insights. So
Thanks,
I really
Maggie.
appreciate
This
it.
was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
you.
Thanks
Take
for
care,
having.
everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.